Perfect. So I suppose moving on then, one of the key parts of the recruitment process is interviews. It'd be great to understand what, from your experience, makes a good. Well, I suppose two things. One, what makes a good interview generally, but also what makes a good interview process. How long should it be? How many interviews should there be? All that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so there's a few things in there. So I suppose firstly, what makes a good interview process? What should it look like? How long should it be?
What makes a good interview process? I think how long should it be should be appropriate to the level of the role. Um, if it's a senior hire, clearly there's going to be more stages. If it's a graduate role, there might be one stage, or there might be an assessment centre. So it's always different. I guess what makes a bad interview is probably better to rule out what makes it bad and then talk about the good. So what makes a bad interview is if a candidate comes out of the experience, with a lesser opinion of the company than when they went in, and that always boils down to the person. I for one think most candidates buy into the person before the role. So, or need to buy into the person before the role. So what makes a good experience is that candidate buys into the hiring manager, the person that they meet. That person is the window to that company. And it doesn't matter how great the opportunity is. If the candidate does not buy into that person sat across the table, or nowadays on a Teams call, they're probably not going to take the job. They need to be inspired, and that
Yeah,
person needs to demonstrate and represent the business in the best possible light. So I think that first and foremost is a really key thing. In terms of the wider process, information is key, and setting expectations from the outset is really valuable. Um, let's say, for example, a candidate is thinking it's going to be a two-stage process, one of them being a formal one, the second one being slightly more informal, or the other way around. If after the second interview it goes to a third, you stand the risk of disengaging that candidate.
yes,
Or if they throw in an exercise in between the interviews, it may disengage the candidate. It's
yeah,
not
I get that.
necessarily a bad thing. The exercise might be something to test the competency around a certain set of tasks. But if it's something that's transparent upfront and shared, it's completely different to throwing in curveballs. I think the more curveballs in an interview process are just going to make the process more difficult. It's like, when you're buying a house, the more transactions there are in a chain,
Yeah,
the less chances there are of everyone transacting successfully and completing. It's the same for the recruitment process. The more stages there are, the more you're really going to weed out candidates for their skill level, or their motivations, and having the right motivations to come across. But at the same time, it's only appropriate if you communicate that to the candidate up front. And setting timescales and expectations is really the only thing that we can control. If the candidate's right for the job, they're right for the job. If they're not, that's absolutely fine. That's why we do interviews. But in order to make the process as smooth as possible, you just really need to be clear and say what you're going to do. Or, sorry, let me redo that. In order
yeah,
to make the process as smooth as possible, you need to be really clear and do what you're going to say.
yeah. I suppose it ties back to what you said earlier, which is um, it's a signifier to the candidate as to what working there might be like. So if you keep shoving in curveballs and changing what the process is versus what you've suggested, it does suggest that working there could be complex, as things could just keep changing and goalposts could keep changing.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, plan for the interview. Don't just be complacent and walk in. As a hiring manager, don't walk into an interview and freestyle it. Have a plan of what you're going to talk about and what you're going to ask. Have a bit of a balance, to talk about the candidate and ask them about their CV and their experiences, and then talk about the the company and the role. But don't leave one of those out. We see that all the time. Candidate
okay.
goes for an interview, and all the client talks about is the company, and then the interview's over.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we say, what did they ask you? Not much. Okay, well then you didn't get the opportunity to demonstrate yourself and therefore see if you were a good fit for the role.
yeah,
Equally, if a client comes in and asks lots of questions, but doesn't really talk about that's the client's opportunity to sell the company and the job. And again, we hear about this all the time.
it's interesting that.
It is very interesting.
Yeah,
So, we make a point of trying our best to educate our clients on how to interview. and make sure you don't miss out those key elements. Because more often than not nowadays, it, the interview is for a candidate to interview the company.
Yeah.
Gone are the days where the candidate should be lucky to work for a company. Times have changed.
Are they good questions you can ask? And obviously, it does depend on role and so on. But are they good questions that you can ask to understand the fit of a candidate?
Yeah, I think
Um,
so. I think good questions are open questions and competency-based questions, and
yeah,
demonstrate using examples. Uh, you know
yeah,
that is going to promote a wide open conversation rather than a tick box exercise going, can you do this? Are you going to do that? Yes, no, yes, no.
yeah. Because I think it's the years ago when I had been through interviews, one of the worst things I thought was when you get asked questions but there's no context to it, and then it's just met by silence, and you go, "Well, I don't actually understand from your question what you're asking me to demonstrate.
Yeah,
Therefore, I can't really answer it in a way that's going to help you make a decision on me."
yeah,
Equally, on
and
the
then
flip
that's a
side,
shame, isn't it? It's
yeah,
a lost opportunity.
completely, completely. I think on the flip side, as a candidate, are there good questions you can ask? Because I think it has a perception that you should always ask questions at the end of the during the interview. I get that you want to be understanding how the role will work for you, how does the company work for you or fit for you, and all that type of stuff. But I think often it can be met with um, sort of just a generic type of when will I hear next, that type of thing. Are there
Mm.
good questions you can ask from the candidate perspective to get more out of an interview and to show that you've actually understood the role or what you're applying for?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're right. Absolutely, always ask questions as a candidate because it just shows intent and taking an interest. Um, Very hard to say which questions are good, but I think questions to ask about the next steps and get some feedback there and then. Is there anything that you know you'd like to find out about me that you haven't asked yet so far? Is there any initial feedback? What are your thoughts? What are the next steps?
Mm.
Um, but also just being inquisitive about things that they haven't asked, because I think how do you impress someone who's interviewing you, or maybe catch them off guard might be a good way. So
Mm.
don't ask generic questions. Would be my advice. I'd certainly say if I was in an interview, I'd want to ask some questions that leave them with a lasting impression, as opposed to covering the basics. I,
Yeah,
I think most candidates can cover the basics by getting information online now.
yeah,
So asking questions that are different, other things that are going to set them apart.
yeah. That's a fair point, because and I think it shows from a candidate's perspective that you have put the effort into understanding that it's the right role, rather than it's just another process you're going through in hope of a salary at the end of it. So yeah, are there any horror stories you've had over the years from either side, that these sort of things that could easily have been avoided?
Oh
In
yeah,
terms of
got plenty. Um, Silly things.
yeah,
The client is running late, or the candidate is running late, but no communication as to why.
yeah,
Or
okay,
they could have probably said something a bit sooner, but they've left it at the last minute. Candidates drop out, unreliable, don't turn up to an interview after confirming. These are the horror stories for the recruiter. I think horror stories
yeah,
for the clients. When a candidate turns up and they're unprepared and they're not presenting themselves in the best way, it's probably a huge bugbear for
yeah.
clients. Um,
So it's a waste of
if you
time then, isn't it?
it's a waste
Yeah,
of time. Yeah,
yeah,
if you're working with a good recruiter, they should have prepared the candidate with the company overview, the person that they're meeting, and what the role entails. If it's a standard competency-based interview, they should have also prepared the candidate with some examples and some key achievements and some highlights about their work that they can share with the company, and not just sell it with jazz hands, but do it in part of the conversation and in line with what the questions are being asked. Have examples. Um, but I think maybe these aren't horror stories per se, but that is the majority of feedback that we get as to
yeah.
why the candidate may not be offered a role. It's lack of preparation. Didn't answer in a way that provided enough examples, didn't expand where they should have expanded.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I could tell you about the majority of horror cases just being candidates just don't turn up. Don't know where they are. Don't know why.
Yeah.
Don't hear from them.
I love that.
Complete waste of time.
It's bizarre when people ghost like that, isn't it? It's just sort of, you put so much time and effort into that point. Why not just, be clear as to, the
It's
intentions?
it's really odd. It's like the eternal question us recruiters ask. It's like, but how? Surely the anxiety will be too much for you to just go, why don't you just say I can't make it?
Yeah. Then just go silent.
We'll never know. Yeah.
So, it's hard bridge. I suppose the key thing to the interview process then is just prep on both customer side, candidate side, and hirer side is prep. And if you get that right, then everyone can get more out of the process.
Yeah, preparation is key, and just anything that makes it a smooth process, anything that sets expectations, and anything that eliminates surprises, and that is from taking the brief to doing the interviews, and later interviews, and then the offer, presenting the offer to the candidate, and negotiating between the candidate and the client, for acceptance and onboarding, and even when they start, you don't want surprises, do you? No one wants a surprise in this process. So we have to do our best and go over and above in order to give them all of the information, and then hope that that's enough, so that if there is anything that's slightly different, it's acceptable.